Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the secret yacht to Cannes. The doorbell rang at precisely 11:23. From my desk in the front room, I glanced up at the sound, then turned my head. The morning sun angled in through the blinds and fell in wide stripes across Wolfe's Persian rug. Fritz, naturally, made no move toward the front hall. He never did. After 7 years at the Brownstone, I'd stopped expecting anything different. He could roast a guinea hen with rosemary and port, select a Riesling that could charm God himself, and polish silver until it glinted like a blade. But if that bell rang, it was mine to answer. I stood, pulled on my coat, January liked to remind you where you lived, and crossed the room. The bell hadn't rung again. Whoever it was, they had either patience or nerve. Both were warning signs in this business. When I opened the door, I saw a man I'd never met. He was in his 50s, clean-shaven, dressed in a dark overcoat with a navy scarf knotted high. His eyes, pale and alert, flicked past me toward the interior of the house. "Delivery for Mr. Wolfe," he said. His accent, faintly French with a trace of Geneva schooling, rode the words like lace on a collar. He handed me a thick envelope, cream-coloured, sealed with wax as red as a wine stain. The crest imprinted on the wax was unfamiliar. 2 lions, a fleur-de-lis, and a boat's wheel. He turned without waiting for a reply. I watched him descend the steps and vanish into the cold. I shut the door, locked it, Wolfe's rules always, and brought the letter inside. Wolfe hadn't moved. He sat in the yellow chair by the window, a book open in one hand, his thumb marking the page. A small crystal vase on the table beside him held a single Paphiopedilum orchid, pale green with violet veins. He didn't glance up. "Fritz?" he asked. His tone, as ever, implied the world could wait. "Fritz is in the kitchen." I opened the door. "Sorry to disappoint." I crossed the rug, turned the envelope in my hand. No return address. Wax seal. Looks continental. Might be a fan letter from the Chamber of Horrors. That got him. He set the book down, extended a finger. I handed it over. He tilted the envelope toward the light and examined the seal. A grunt escaped him. "Well?" I asked. "This crest," he said slowly, "is French. House of Duval. Maritime nobility. Minor lineage near Marseille." He reached into the drawer beside him, took a letter opener, silver, monogrammed, and sliced the flap. The wax fell, split and clean, onto his lap. Wolfe unfolded the letter and read silently. I waited. After 30 seconds, I gave up waiting and walked to the window. A car was pulling away from the curb. He didn't wait for a tip, I noted. Still nothing. "Wolfe," I said, "are you planning to die in that chair, or will you eventually explain?" He sighed low and long. When he looked up, his eyes were narrowed. "This letter," he said, "is from a woman named Simone Duval. Until last month, she was the assistant to Charles Brevel." I turned. Brevel was a name I knew. Financier, war bonds, suspected fraud, and vanished tax filings. He'd died a few weeks ago, quietly. A stroke, if the papers were to be believed. "She writes," Wolfe continued, "that Brevel was not a victim of fate, but of design. He died aboard a yacht, docked temporarily off the coast of Cannes. The Charlemagne. She believes he was poisoned." He held up the page, still flat in his hand. "Miss Duval claims she has reason to fear for her safety, that she has evidence, not a confession but a ledger, and that this ledger was brought with her to New York aboard the same yacht." That got my attention. A yacht, a foreign ledger, and a dead financier. It wasn't exactly a burglary in the Bronx. "Why us?" I asked. "She was told," Wolfe said, tapping the final paragraph, "that I might take an interest, because of this." He held up the paper. There, under her signature, was a line in delicate cursive. "He spoke often of the orchid you once named after him, Paphiopedilum brevelianum." Fritz, entering with a tray, paused mid-step. He set down Wolfe's morning beer with unusual care. Wolfe snorted. "Ridiculous." I lifted a brow. "You never named one after him?" "Of course not. He lacked even the minimal aesthetic sensibility necessary to earn the honour. Still, he didn't throw the letter away. That was telling. I stepped to the bookshelf and pulled the binder marked Orchid Crossings, Europe. It was alphabetical. Brevellianum wasn't listed. But there were notes under B, handwritten, in Wolfe's ink. "Looks like you were experimenting," I said. "I experiment constantly. That is no confirmation." He returned the letter to its envelope, tapped the wax seal with a thick finger, then laid it on the table beside the orchid. "She asks for discretion," he said. "An immediate consultation." I glanced at the clock. 11:40, late morning. "Do you want me to call her?" I asked. "No," he frowned. "Her address is here." He tapped the folded corner. "Go, speak with her, see if she exists." "And if she does?" "Then ascertain whether she is a fool, a liar, or merely frightened." I took the envelope, folded the page carefully, and slipped it into my coat pocket. There was something else, a faint scent on the paper. Citrus, tart and sharp. Not perfume. Preservation oil. I didn't mention it. Outside, the sky was the colour of pewter. Snow had crusted along the curb. I turned up my collar, started the car, and pulled away from West 35th. Whoever Simone Duval was, she'd sent a letter that brought Wolfe to full attention before noon, a rare event. And that red seal still sat on the edge of his chair, cracked neatly in two, like something old, broken, and not quite buried. Fritz didn't call out. He never did. He simply appeared in the doorway with that slight tilt of the head he reserved for matters urgent or peculiar. This was both. "She insists, monsieur," he said. "She will not leave." I set down the paper. Wolfe didn't look up. He was halfway through a stack of seed catalogues which, in our world, outranked death threats and dinner invitations alike. "She gave a name?" I asked. She did not. She rang 3 times in quick succession. When I opened the upper pane, she identified herself only as expected. "Expected by whom?" I asked. She didn't specify. I glanced at Wolfe. Still no movement. The man could ignore a hand grenade if it fell on a Latin noun. "All right," I said, already standing. "I'll deal with her." I took the hall steps 2 at a time, crossed to the vestibule, and opened the inner door. She was there. No hat, no gloves. A French-cut coat in charcoal wool, belted tight. Her curls had been pinned into a chignon that looked too deliberate to be careless. The eyes were grey. She didn't blink. "Miss Simone Duval?" I asked. She gave a single nod. "I'm Archie Goodwin. I opened your letter yesterday." Her mouth didn't move. "Shall I take that as permission to step aside?" I asked. Her gaze broke. She entered. As always, I locked the door behind her. The brownstone is not a hotel. When we stepped into the office, Wolfe was already seated, hands folded across his abdomen like a Roman bust. The orchid from yesterday had vanished. Its absence made the table seem more austere than usual. Miss Duval crossed to the red chair without prompting. That scored a point in Wolfe's book. He hates having to instruct the obvious. She sat with her knees aligned, back straight, hands unclasped in her lap. No trembling, no false drama. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "I am not fond of being surprised before noon, Miss Duval. Fritz is trained not to permit it." "I did not come to surprise you, Mr. Wolfe," she said. "I came because someone has tried twice to frighten me into silence." I took my usual chair. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. "I read your letter. I assume the content remains unchanged." She nodded. "Yes." She glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. But I was imprecise. I hoped you would allow me to correct it in person. Wolfe gave a small nod. "Proceed." She drew a slim notebook from her handbag. Not leather, linen-backed, bound with twine. She opened it, found a page, and then paused. "I worked for Charles Brevel for 5 years. I was not his secretary. I was his records officer. I catalogued all financial movements related to the Atlantic Holdings portfolio, including its overseas shells." "Which shells?" Wolfe asked. "Corsair Investments, Pelagos Maritime, Lucent Property, and 2 others registered to a holding bank in Montreux. They all flowed through the yacht." Wolfe blinked. "Yacht?" She looked at me, then back. "The Charlemagne, a 110-foot motor yacht flagged in Gibraltar. It anchored off Cannes for 3 weeks in October. Mr. Bravel died aboard it." I frowned. "Cause?" "Officially, cardiac arrest. There was a French physician who signed off." And unofficially? Wolfe asked. Mr. Brevell had no history of heart problems. He took long walks every morning and didn't drink. I was there that evening. I brought him coffee. He seemed well. The next morning he was found face down on the port deck, the tray untouched. She stopped. Wolfe didn't speak. Something else happened, I prompted. Yes. She turned a page in her notebook. The morning after his death, the ship's captain, a man named Cyril Dewey, announced that our return to Marseille was cancelled. He said the vessel would proceed instead to Madeira for refuelling, then north. He didn't explain why. And you? Wolfe asked. I was told to disembark. The tender dropped me at Port d'Antibes, along with a single trunk and the company files. 2 days later, I was flown to New York on a commercial voucher. She met Wolfe's gaze directly. Mr. Wolfe, the files were incomplete. The ledger was missing. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You are certain it was aboard the yacht? She opened her purse again and removed a slip of paper. Faded, yellowed, with one edge scorched. I stepped forward and took it. One side showed a series of coded lines. Initials, numbers, months. The top line read, DF, Bridgewater, July. I passed it to Wolfe. He didn't touch it. You believe this is part of the missing ledger? He asked. She nodded. It was tucked inside Brevell's French passport. I found it the day I arrived in New York. I believe he meant me to have it, or meant you to. Wolfe exhaled heavily. Miss Duval, the suggestion that a dying man would arrange posthumous delivery of financial evidence through a yacht itinerary, a ship captain, and an Atlantic crossing strikes me as baroque. She didn't move. Then let me be direct. Someone followed me from Antibes. They searched my hotel in Manhattan. I didn't call the police because they wouldn't understand the significance of Brevell's accounts. But you might. Why me? Wolfe asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag one final time and produced a folded clipping. French newspaper, October 28th. I unfolded it. It was an obituary. Charles Brevell, aged 59. But below it, a handwritten note in ink. If harm befalls me, seek Wolfe. The man is thorough, and he hates incompetence. Wolfe's expression didn't change, but he lifted the yellow orchid from the tray Fritz had brought earlier. He turned it between his fingers. Who else knows of this? No one. I told my cousin in Astoria that I had a job offer. Nothing else. Wolfe tapped his thumb against the chair's armrest. You believe Mr. Brevell was murdered for the ledger? Yes. You believe someone on that yacht did it? Yes. You believe that person followed you to New York? I believe they never left. That silenced the room. Outside, a horn honked, far off. Wolfe glanced toward the window, then at me. Mr. Goodwin, you will escort Miss Duval to a cab, secure her address, instruct Saul Pantzer to begin immediate surveillance of her lodging and routine. I stood. Wolfe turned back to her. Miss Duval, if your intentions are genuine and this ledger is real, then you are already in considerable danger. If they searched your hotel once, they will again. You are not a client yet, but if you return tomorrow, we will be prepared. She nodded once, stood, and left her notebook on the table. The door clicked behind us as I walked her out. She didn't speak again, but when I opened the door, she turned to me. Does he always talk like that? Like what? I asked. Like the world is a chessboard, and he's already seen the end. I held the door for her. That's the idea, I said. Then she was gone, and I was left with a name I didn't trust, a dead man on a yacht, and a page that smelled faintly of smoke and salt. Back upstairs, Wolfe had already returned to his seed catalogues, but the notebook lay untouched on the table. Its spine was fraying. The ribbon marker pointed to the day Charles Brevell died, and next to it the orchid turned slightly in the light, its petals half folded, like a gesture waiting to be answered. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply said, "The matter of the strongbox, Mr. Goodwin. Confirm its existence. Quietly." That was his version of a marching order. So I marched. At 6:30 sharp, I left the brownstone with a coat over one arm and a key in my pocket. The key wasn't ours. It belonged to Simone Duval. She'd handed it to me that afternoon, wrapped in tissue. Brevell's study, she'd said. Top floor, rear of the house. He never let me in. Brevell's townhouse sat on East 72nd, a 5-story stone stack with wrought iron railings and windows that stared like empty picture frames. It looked abandoned, but the gas meter was ticking. I let myself in with the main key. The place smelled like furniture polish, rust, and the last echoes of money. I locked the door behind me. The study was up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. 3rd floor, rear hall. The door matched Simone's description. Oak, double-panelled, a brass lock below the handle. The key fit, turned, snapped softly open. I stepped in, then stopped. The lights were already on. The lamp on the desk glowed amber. Books lined the shelves in symmetrical ranks. Gravel had liked order. A leather-bound folio lay open on the table, half a page turned, and slumped in the chair behind it, one arm curled over the backrest like a shawl, sat a man. He was motionless. The line of his spine was too still. I didn't call out. I stepped closer. The man was in his 40s, dressed in a dark vest and shirt, French cufflinks, no tie. His hair was slicked back, thinning. One hand rested on the table, fingers splayed. The other, pale and rigid, held a porcelain teacup. The cup hadn't spilled. The saucer below it showed no marks. I leaned in. There was no rise and fall at the chest, no warmth at the cheeks. His eyes, pale hazel, were open just enough to show the iris. The tea was still steaming. I stepped back and looked around. The room had one door, no windows. The fireplace hadn't been used. A single wall sconce glowed above the bookshelf. No sign of violence, no blood, no overturned chair or scuff on the rug. But the air was wrong, too quiet, like a curtain had dropped over something you weren't supposed to see. I crossed to the desk. The folio was written in French, stock transfers and bearer bond summaries, Bravel's markings. I turned a page. Nothing on teakwood, no strongbox in sight. A small drawer under the table was locked. No key in evidence. I didn't open it. Instead, I stepped to the door, pulled it shut behind me, and dialed the police from the hall phone. Then I waited. They arrived 15 minutes later. 2 uniforms, 1 sergeant, and inevitably, Inspector Kramer. He pushed past the others like a man rescuing a dinner reservation. "You again?" he said, spotting me. "Why is it always you?" "Maybe I've got a magnet for trouble," I offered. He didn't smile. "Who's the stiff?" "Thibaut Marchand," I said. "Valet to Charles Bravel. Simone Duval said he stayed behind after the death." Kramer moved into the study. He paused at the doorway, then stepped inside. "Locked room?" "Yes." "You locked it?" "No, I found it locked. I had the key." His head snapped around. "She gave it to me," I said before he asked. "Duval. She said Marchand might know something about a missing ledger." "Ledger?" "Coded transactions, yacht accounts, French shell companies." Kramer let out a long breath. "Don't get clever, Goodwin. That sounds like motive." I wouldn't argue. He stepped to the body and peered at the teacup. "Doesn't look natural." I thought so too. No signs of struggle, no break-in, door locked, windows sealed. Correct. He crouched beside the chair. A detective named Puller took photographs. Another dusted for prints. I stayed near the bookshelf and watched. Marchand hadn't moved. His skin had paled by a degree. Kramer stood. "All right," he said. "Talk. Why were you here?" "Simone Duval said the missing ledger might be here. Last place she saw it was a teakwood strongbox. Bravel's private study. She gave me the key." "What's Wolfe say?" "Only that I should verify it." Kramer snorted. "That's Wolfe all over. Sit tight. Let Goodwin wade through corpses." He turned to the sergeant. "Seal the building. I want every print logged and bag the tea." Then to me. "You're coming down with me." "Sure. But I want you to understand something," he said, stepping closer. "If this turns out to be another of Wolfe's puzzles, and you're the piece that doesn't fit, I'll cut corners." "Duly noted," I said. "But if you find that ledger, I'd start with whoever wanted it gone." His jaw tensed. Then he turned back toward the body. I left the study, hands in my pockets, and waited on the front stoop. Snow had begun to fall again, quiet, slow, insistent. Simone had said the strongbox was real. Wolfe had said to confirm it. But all I'd confirmed was a dead man, a locked door, and a teacup that didn't tip. And Wolfe? He was likely finishing dessert, unbothered, unrushed, waiting for the world to circle back to him, as it always did. Kramer arrived at 10:15, stinking of overcoat steam, irritation, and the tail end of a bad shave. He rang the bell once, then again, with the flat-knuckled confidence of a man who didn't fear Fritz, which, as always, was a mistake. Fritz called me from the kitchen. "Inspector Kramer insists," he said, "though it is not an hour for visitors." "It rarely is," I replied. "Let him in." I greeted the inspector at the door with my most agreeable expression. "You know," he said, stepping inside without waiting, "one of these days I'm going to show up and find Wolfe hiding under the rug. I'll warn Fritz to sweep better." He brushed past, his shoes still wet with melted snow, and entered the office like a man used to finding the worst. Wolfe didn't rise. "Inspector," he said, "you are early and I am displeased, but if you insist, speak." Kramer didn't sit. He planted himself near the red chair and pulled his coat open. "You got a visitor yesterday?" Wolfe gave a slight nod. "I often do." She had a name, Simone Duval. I stood to one side, examining a cuticle. Wolfe let his gaze drift toward me. "Yes," he said. "Miss Duval was here. Her business was relevant. Mr. Goodwin has pursued it." "And never thought to tell me?" Kramer said. Wolfe raised a brow. "Inspector, were we to notify you of every potential matter that did not yet include a corpse, your telephone would be blistered." Kramer's face reddened. "Well, now it does include a corpse. Marchand, dead, in Bravel's study." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin informed me. It was regrettable, but not surprising." "Not surprising?" Kramer barked. "No, Mr. Marchand was the most vulnerable link in the chain. His survival was unlikely once the chain was targeted." Kramer exhaled through his nose. "Duval said something about a yacht, the Charlemagne. That Bravel died on it?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Miss Duval claimed he was poisoned. On board. Off the coast of Cannes." Kramer blinked. "But the yacht is no longer in France," Wolfe finished. I stepped in. According to port records, the Charlemagne was logged entering U.S. waters 3 days after Bravel's death. Docked briefly in Yonkers. Private mooring, one night. "And then?" "Gone," I said. "No further movement. No customs stamp, no fuel requisition, no inspection trail." Kramer shifted his weight. "Who booked the mooring?" "A man named Cyril Dewey." That got a look. "Same Dewey who captained the yacht." "Miss Duval says yes." Wolfe opened his eyes wider. "A man who docks, pays in cash, and vanishes is not merely elusive, he is strategic." Kramer paced once across the rug, then turned. "Archie, you saw the ledger?" "No," I said. "I saw a fragment, coded initials and dates. Miss Duval says the rest was in a teakwood strongbox. She last saw it on board." "And now?" "Presumed missing. Marchand might have had it." "Or destroyed it," Kramer muttered. "Possibly," Wolfe agreed. "But unlikely. There is value in leverage, more than in ashes." Kramer turned to me. "Where's Dewey now?" I shook my head. "No idea, but I've got a lead at the port. Guy named Hurlin, handles permits and late-night dockside movements. I'm heading there now." Wolfe made a noise in his throat. "Return with something tangible," he said. "A vanishing yacht is an abstraction, but a man, even a coward, leaves footprints." Kramer muttered something that might have been agreement, then stormed out, coat flapping behind him like a disgruntled cape. By noon I was in Yonkers. The harbour office stood under a skeletal crane, grey sky stretching west across the Hudson like tarnished pewter. The shack smelled of coffee, oil and mildew. Inside I found Hurlin, tweed cap, oil-streaked collar, brown teeth, and a memory like a steel trap. "Dewey," he said. "Yeah, he was here, pulled in quiet. Didn't run engines long." "Day?" I asked. "October 29th. I jotted it down. 2 days after Bravel's death." "Paid cash," Hurlin nodded. "Didn't want receipt." "Description?" "Mid-50s, ruddy, grey stubble, gloves. Odd thing, wore sunglasses after dark." "Alone?" "No, had a crew, 3 deckhands. Spoke French mostly, all gone next morning." "And the yacht?" "Gone too, no wake, no sound, like it slipped out sideways." "Nameplate?" I asked. "Didn't check, but the hull was painted over. Fresh job, you could smell the resin." I leaned forward. "You remember anything else?" He hesitated. "Yeah. Before he left he asked about dry ice. Wanted to know if there was any nearby. I pointed him to the cold plant south of the yard." "What for?" No idea. Said he needed it for preservation. That pricked something in my gut. I handed Hurlin a bill, took his card, and left. The cold plant had closed by the time I arrived, but I walked the perimeter. No footprints, no packaging, but a broken slat in the alley gate showed someone had entered, maybe weeks back. By dusk, I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe looked up from the globe. Yes? Hurlin confirms Dewey moored one night, paid cash, yacht vanished. Hull was painted over, no nameplate. Wolfe frowned. And? He inquired about dry ice, at a cold storage plant near the harbour. Said it was for preservation. Wolfe pressed his palms together. Preservation of what? That, I said. He didn't say. We sat in silence. Outside, the wind caught a trash can lid and rolled it down the street like a coin. In the lamplight, Wolfe's fingers steepled higher. He did not refuel, he murmured. He changed no registry. He used no customs lane. Yet he transported something. Perhaps not a person, not a ledger, something else. I raised a brow. He wanted it cold, I said, and undetected. Wolfe nodded. Then he was either concealing decay or preventing it. He reached for his beer. I didn't ask which he meant. The morning had all the charm of wet cardboard. I was in the kitchen, wrapping up toast and pouring coffee when Fritz emerged from the pantry holding an envelope like it had hissed at him. I was retrieving paper for Wolfe's correspondence, he said. This fell behind the tray. He passed it to me. It was the same red wax envelope Simone Duval had delivered, now opened, creased and faintly stained at the corner from Wolfe's thumb. I thought we'd gone through it, I said. Fritz shook his head. There was something else folded within, slipped under the lining. I peeled it back. Inside was a smaller slip of paper, folded twice, cream stock. The ink, faded but still legible, read, "If anything happens, give this to Wolfe. He will know, no signature." But the handwriting matched the clipped note from the obituary Simone had shown us. It was Brevel. I didn't wait. I took it straight into the office. Wolfe was at his desk, hands in repose, eyes half closed in contemplation, or digestion. The scent of mustard seeds and pork broth still lingered in the air. I held out the slip. This was tucked into the original envelope. Fritz found it. He opened his eyes. I handed it over. He read it once, then again. His brow furrowed. "I dislike being underestimated," he said. "And yet Brevel left me no object, only a pronoun." "This," I echoed. He tapped the paper. "If anything happens, give this to Wolfe." He turned his gaze toward me. "Where is Miss Duval?" "In the front room." "Bring her in." I did. She entered composed, though her gloves remained in her hand. Wolfe didn't rise. "Miss Duval," he said, "we found a note from Mr. Brevel, addressed to you, directed at me. You failed to mention it." She blinked once, then lowered her chin. "I didn't know it was there." "Indeed? You brought the envelope, but not the full content." "I swear," she said, stepping closer, "I only enclosed my letter." And yet this note remained, folded, embedded, hidden. She looked down at her gloves. "I didn't know." Wolfe leaned forward. "You are not a fool, Miss Duval. Mr. Brevel instructed you to give something to me. Not a sentiment. An item. A specific object. What is it?" Her lips parted, closed. Then she turned away from the desk, walked to the edge of the rug, and stopped. "I thought I lost it," she said softly. "I didn't intend to deceive you." "What was it?" Wolfe asked. She reached into her handbag. From the interior flap, she drew out a small folded square of paper. It had the worn look of something handled often but shown rarely. She stepped forward and placed it on Wolfe's desk. I moved to his shoulder. Wolfe unfolded it with care. 1 page. Handwritten. Tidy. The same cream stock as the note. Across the top, a date, July the 7th. Below that, a series of entries. Coded. No full names, just initials, locations and months. DF, Bridgewater, July AR, Lucent, August SM, Zurich, September. There were 6 in all. Wolfe reached for a ruler and aligned the page. His eyes scanned, unblinking. After 30 seconds, he tapped the first line. DF, Bridgewater, July. He looked up. "Miss Duval, explain this." She stayed near the window. voice low but clear. "I believe those are payment notations. Mr. Bravel kept ledgers in code, always initials, firm names, and the month of disbursement. That page came from the middle of the binder. The strongbox was never full. It contained fragments, loose sheets, annotated pages. That one was the only I managed to keep." "You took it?" Wolfe asked. "No, I found it after I arrived in New York, hidden inside one of Bravel's portfolios. I didn't know it was there, I swear it." Wolfe didn't answer. He turned to me. "Bridgewater," he said. "Howard Bridgewater," I replied. "Tax accountant, Upper East. Simone mentioned him, said Bravel trusted him with European holdings." "DF," Wolfe mused aloud. "Possibly Dewey, Cyril, or another unknown." I stepped closer. "There's a second layer of ink," I said. "See here, the R in Bridgewater has been overwritten. Same hand, but different pressure." Wolfe nodded. "A correction. Someone changed the name, or obscured it." He held the page closer to the light. "The ink was wet when folded. Note the smudge on the upper left." Simone remained still. "I thought it might help," she said, "but I feared it would make me a target." "Then you feared rightly," Wolfe said. He folded the page precisely along its original crease and returned it to the desk blotter. "We now have confirmation that Bravel's ledgers were real, that at least one entry implicates Bridgewater in a dispersal, possibly offshore, possibly illicit." He turned his gaze back to her. "Miss Duval, from this moment forward, nothing leaves this house without my instruction. You do not speak to the police without my presence. You do not handle this page again." "I understand." "You will write down every name, every transaction you remember, in sequence, in silence, no assumptions, just facts." "Yes." "Mr. Goodwin will remain present." She nodded. "Archie," Wolfe said, "escort Miss Duval to the dining room. Bring paper and a pencil, no pen." I stepped to the door. Simone followed. At the threshold I glanced back. Wolfe sat alone with the folded page in front of him. His eyes were half-lidded, but the left hand, resting near the orchid vase, was curled tight. He wasn't at rest. He was waiting. And something in that line, DF, Bridgewater, July, had struck him hard enough to hold his full attention, which, in our world, meant the wheels had started turning. I took the crosstown bus to Lexington and walked the last 2 blocks, letting the cold burn off whatever was left of the night's coffee. The address Wolfe had circled for me in neat black ink belonged to a tan brick office suite, wedged between a dental supply company and a place that promised custom monograms while you wait. Howard Bridgewater's name was etched in brass just above the buzzer. The font was precise, serifed, clean, humorless. Inside, a receptionist the colour of old ivory lifted her head. "Mr. Bridgewater's next appointment is at 3. I flashed a card. "Mr. Goodwin, Manhattan licensure. I'm not a client, just a man who'd like 5 minutes to ask about yachts." She blinked, then said, "One moment," and disappeared through a door with a frosted pane. She came back less than a minute later and tilted her head. "He'll see you, briefly." I entered. The room smelled of cedar shavings and linseed oil. Bridgewater stood behind a mahogany desk that seemed too tall for him. He was lean, buttoned in grey, with fingers that gripped his fountain pen like a surgical tool. I took a seat without asking. The chair was leather, cracked at the arms. "Mr. Bridgewater," I said, "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Wolfe, Nero Wolfe." A flicker passed through his expression, just under the eyes. Then it was gone. "I've heard of him," he said. He sat. I set my notebook on my lap, but didn't open it. "I'd like to ask you about Charles Bravel." Silence. He reached for a file, opened it, and stared at nothing. "I don't know the name." "Financier, Atlantic Holdings portfolio. Died 3 weeks ago off the coast of France. You were listed in one of his records. Line item, DF, Bridgewater, July." Bridgewater turned a page that was blank. "I have no connection to that man." "You've never worked with him?" "No." "Met him?" "No." "Been to France?" "Never." The denials came too fast. I let the silence bloom. He adjusted his collar. His nails were filed, too neatly. I leaned back. "Do you handle European accounts?" "I've prepared filings for American expatriates, yes, but nothing involving yachts or death or Mr. Bravel." "Do you know a woman named Simone Duval?" "No." I let my eyes roam. His office was Spartan but deliberate. 2 diplomas, 1 commendation, 1 shelf of hardbacks, tax law, 2 volumes on maritime commercial registration, and a framed photo. 3rd shelf, far right. I stood. May I? He didn't answer. I stepped over. It was a glossy black and white matte finish. 5 men in tuxedos, 1 woman in sequins, on the deck of a long yacht moored beside a stone quay. A banner fluttered in the background. Gala du Port, Marseille, 1929. I turned. Never been to France? Bridgewater stood too quickly. That was a client event. I was a guest. I don't even remember the name of the boat. Looks like a beautiful night. I was drunk. I stepped away. He returned to his chair with stiff dignity. So, I said, you've never met Bravel, and you've never been to Cannes. He looked at his hands, folded them, unfolded them again. I've been to Marseille once, 10 years ago, on business. But not Cannes? No. And not Bravel? I've told you. I nodded, then opened my notebook. Do you have any business relationships with firms called Lucent Property or Corsair Investments? No. Or shell accounts tied to Swiss tax shelters? That's a serious allegation. I'm not alleging anything, I said. Just reading off a page that survived a man's suspicious death. His jaw tightened. If you have questions, speak to my legal representative. Is that a suggestion or a requirement? He didn't answer. I closed the notebook. One more thing, I said. You were listed under DF. Any idea what that means? No. No guesses? No. I stood. Thank you for your time. At the door, I turned back. The photo, and it's a nice shot. Shame the yacht name isn't visible, but I bet someone at the Marseille registry might know it. He didn't move. I left. On the sidewalk, the wind bit down from the east. Bridgewater was hiding something, but I didn't know what. Yet. The evening paper came late, which was appropriate, so did the news. I'd just set it down, folded across the arm of the red chair, when Wolfe emerged from the dining room, still wearing his cravat and the vague look of digestion. I said, "You might want to read the bottom half of page 2. He crossed the rug without a word, took the paper, tilted it into the lamplight, read slowly, then stopped. His fingers stiffened. He sat, creaking back into the yellow chair like it was part of him, then read the article again, top to bottom, without blinking. I waited. When he was done, he folded the paper and handed it back. "That is unacceptable," he said. "I thought it was unfortunate." He stared at the empty air. His tone dropped. "No, it is deliberate." The headline was modest. Body found in Bronx Botanical Garden. Foul play suspected. It had been a maintenance man. Early evening. One of those roaming security fellows with a flashlight and a lunch wrapped in wax paper. He'd found a man slumped at the base of a tree. Not just any tree. The newly restored orchid pavilion. Cause of death? Cyanide. The name came second-hand. No identification on the body. But the pockets held a card from the Yonkers Marina. The exact slip rental we'd tracked last week. Name, Cyril Dewey. Wolfe's voice remained quiet. "I want everything," he said. "Post-mortem. Timeline. Position of the body. Clothing. Last meal. I want the precise species of orchids near his corpse." "Already on it," I said. "I rang Kramer. He's on his way." Wolfe's face twitched. "A waste of his time, but he'll insist." "I thought you liked him for this one." "I do. I like that he's angry." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. I made the trip down and opened up. Kramer didn't say hello. He stomped in, peeled off his hat, and ran a hand through damp hair that looked like it had been combed with sandpaper. I followed him up the stairs. Wolfe didn't rise. He merely said, "You've read it?" Kramer tossed his coat onto the nearest surface that wasn't porcelain or precious. "I didn't read it," he growled. "I found the body." Wolfe's eyes flicked once. "You've had a long day." "I've had a hell of a week, and now I've got a second corpse. Same yacht, same mystery." He dropped into the red chair with the grace of an artillery round. "Cyril Dewey," he said, "captain of the Charlemagne, rent payer, exit artist, poisoned under a tree full of rare orchids, and your name's already on the wire." Wolfe's brows lowered. "That is absurd." Kramer glared. "Some junior clerk at the garden said he heard a woman mutter it. That's Nero Wolfe's kind of flower." She laughed. But someone wrote it down. Now I've got reporters asking me if you kill people with petals. Wolfe closed his eyes. It was not sleep. It was rage compressed into stillness. When he opened them again, the blue was colder than usual. What do we know? Kramer sighed. Time of death. Approximate. Between 4 and 5. No ID on the body except for the marina stub. Clothing suggests civilian life. No yacht uniform. No wallet. Hands stained, grease, rope fibre, but clean fingernails. Meaning? Meaning he'd been ashore long enough to scrub up but still handled lines recently. Position of the body? Wolfe asked. Slumped beside a bench. Right leg twisted under. No signs of struggle. No bruising. Mouth open. Tongue black. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Cyanide. Confirmed, Kramer said. Hydrogen cyanide, the fast kind. We're checking for glass vials. Any sign of forced ingestion? No. No residue on the lips. No broken glass. If it was ingested, it was voluntary. If inhaled, then someone made him breathe it. Either way, no eyewitness. Wolfe turned his head toward me. Mr. Goodwin. Already checked, I said. The Orchid Pavilion was under maintenance, closed to the public at 4. One security guard said he passed through at 4:20 and saw no one. Dewey wasn't found until 5:15. Then he was placed deliberately, Wolfe said. Kramer leaned forward. Do you mean murdered there? No, Wolfe said. I mean staged. The location matters. A message. Kramer scratched the side of his face. This is about the yacht. Of course. And Bravel? Yes. And the ledger? That remains to be seen. Kramer let out a slow breath. I don't like this. I don't like people dying this fast, this close together, and this publicly. Marchand, now Dewey. Who's next? Wolfe didn't answer. Kramer stood. If you're keeping anything from me, Wolfe. I am not, Wolfe said. I want what you want. The truth. Then give me something. Wolfe's gaze went to the fireplace. Dewey was useful. That made him dangerous. He knew what the yacht carried, who it carried, and where it went. If he wasn't killed for what he did, he was killed for what he might do. Kramer didn't argue. He turned, grabbed his coat, and left without a word. 10 minutes later, Wolfe spoke again. Mr. Goodwin. Yes. I want you to contact Saul Panzer. Full background on Cyril Dewey, French records, maritime logs, personal history. I want to know when he was born, where he studied, and whether he ever raised orchids of his own. You think it's symbolic? I think it's calculated. And deliberate? Yes. And if it wasn't cyanide? Wolfe looked at me. Then the killer wants us to think it was. I made the trip just after noon, a quarter-mile north of Union Square. The building looked like a skeleton waiting to fall inward. Pale brick, window glass dusty as frosted cake. A lobby so quiet you could hear the echo of your own purpose. The tenant board listed no Bravel, no holdings, and no recent renovations. But Suite 302 still had a tarnished brass plate beside the door. It read, Atlantic Holdings, Private Office. The door was unlocked. I pushed in and paused. The room was stripped. No chairs, no cabinets, no clocks. Just a single desk in the corner and a coat rack with no coat. Even the nameplate was gone. The man behind the counter looked up from a roll of binding cord. Mid-60s, white shirt buttoned all the way up, spectacles resting on a cord at his collarbone. Good morning, I said. You Mr. Carmichael? I'm the son, he said, dry as old paper. What are you looking to bind? Nothing at the moment. I'm actually looking for something that was already brought in. He gave me a look. We don't keep clients' names on display. I nodded. No, but I think you'll remember this one. A man named Thibaut Marchand dropped off a package here. Oilskin wrapped, about so big. I mimed the size with both hands. Carmichael's brow lowered. That parcel wasn't a book. My eyebrows went up. No? It looked like it wanted to be one, he said. But the contents were damp, smelled odd, citrus mostly, but underneath something else like vinegar and ink. He set down the cord. The covering was stitched shut. Whoever wrapped it didn't want it opened. I asked Marchand if he wanted it cleaned or dried. He told me no, just reinforced. He paid in cash. And then? He said someone would collect it the next day. I leaned forward. Did they? Carmichael looked at me. Tall man, British accent, red tie, nervous eyes, paid with a 5 and exact change. Bridgewater. Did he give a name, I asked. No, said Carmichael, but he asked whether the material inside was still legible. And? I told him it was none of my business, said Carmichael. Which was true, but I saw the edges. They were typed sheets, warped but intact. It wasn't a novel, Mr. Goodwin, I said. Archie Goodwin. Carmichael studied me a moment, then gave a slight nod. The thing is, he said, I remember one other detail. He reached under the counter, pulled out a small square of wax paper, set it between us. A faint amber circle had stained one corner. This was left under the parcel, he said. I kept it because I didn't like the smell. Thought it might be leaking something acidic. I picked it up. The scent was faint, lemon oil and something antiseptic. The smell reminded me of French floor polish. Wolfe had once banned it from the front hall. Too sharp for orchids. You didn't keep the parcel? I asked. Carmichael shook his head. It left with the man. He said he'd return if it needed rewrapping. Did he? No. I tucked the wax paper in my inner pocket. Thanked him. Outside, the sidewalk was dry now, but my coat was damp at the shoulders. I found a phone booth half a block south and dialed home. Fritz picked up on the third ring. Wolfe, I said. The line clicked, then Wolfe's voice. Report. I have the shop, I said. Carmichael and Sons. Marchand dropped off the package. Not a book, but bound sheets. Wet ones. Smelled like lemon oil and vinegar. Preservative, Wolfe said. Exactly. Next day, a man picked it up. British, tall, red tie. Sounds like Bridgewater. Indeed. There's more. Carmichael remembered typed sheets. Said they weren't legible from the outside, but intact. That parcel, the one Marchand dropped, it was the ledger. Wolfe breathed once. Quiet. Very well, he said. Return immediately. Bring the wax paper. That was Wolfe. He didn't say, well done or excellent. He just said, return. I did. Back in the office, Wolfe took the wax square with a pair of sugar tongs, sniffed it, grimaced. Citronella oil, he said, mixed with ethanol, very crude. He set it on a sheet of newsprint. That was meant to buy time, he said, to prevent mildew, to obscure the scent of age. I sat down. So Bridgewater has the ledger? Wolfe's lips thinned. No, he said, Bridgewater had it. You think he lost it? I think, Wolfe said, he passed it on. To whom? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his chair half an inch to the right, stared at the orchids beyond the glass. Someone willing to kill for it, he said softly. My pencil tapped the margin of my notebook. The butler hadn't died for nothing. He had handed the secret to the last man who should have held it. And somewhere in Manhattan, the true copy still breathed. Not in a drawer, not in a fire, but on a page, bound, sealed and preserved in citrus and lies. The rain came in soft clicks against the window panes. Wolfe had dismissed dinner with half a plate untouched, which meant something in his brain had outrun his appetite. I was in the office, leaning back with a newspaper and one eye on the door. When the bell rang at 8:30, I didn't need to guess. Saul always rang twice. I opened the door to a silhouette in a grey coat, collar turned high. He stepped in without a word, nodded, and unbuttoned slowly. Saul Panzer didn't waste breath on greetings. He waited until we were both in the office and I'd shut the door behind us. Fritz brought coffee without asking. 2 cups. Wolfe looked up, his eyes heavy with expectation, not surprise. Saul placed his notebook on the edge of the desk. I have it. Good. Wolfe didn't move. The Charlemagne never reached open waters. It left the Manhattan Marina 3 nights ago, as reported, about 10 after 9, but it never passed Yonkers. No Coast Guard log, no tow report, no beacon, no sighting. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So, it turned off the Hudson just before Hastings, docked at a private inlet. Property belongs to a holding company, Amadeus Holdings. Wolfe lifted a brow. Bridgewater? Saul nodded. Paperwork's thin, but I traced the tax filings. Registered to a Delaware agent with ties to Bridgewater's firm. The inlet's part of an estate, 35 acres, no listed residence. Been quiet for years. I said, that's not exactly next to a grocery store. Who's watching it? Saul met my eye. Caretaker. Says he reports to the legal firm every quarter, gets his check by mail. He didn't know the boat had docked. Wolfe's fingers made a slow steeple. Saul continued. The yacht's there now. Different name on the stern. The Prosperine. Black paint. Fresh. All identifying marks gone. But I checked the interior design against Marina Commission records. Same curvature, same teak inlay, same folding chart table. And the tender? Gone. Either offloaded or hidden. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. The yacht did not disappear. It hid. Correct. Bridgewater created a fiction, Wolfe muttered. A maritime ghost. The illusion of departure to account for movement. Or the opposite, I said, standing, to account for no movement at all. Wolfe looked at me with half-lidded eyes. Mr. Goodwin, enlighten me. If everyone believes the boat sailed to France, nobody watches where it isn't. Wolfe grunted. Exactly. Saul flipped a page in his notebook. That estate was acquired 4 years ago. Bridgewater's firm filed a construction permit for dock expansion, new lighting, and reinforced mooring lines. Anticipation, Wolfe said. Long in the making. Saul offered the last page. Want the photographs? Wolfe waved him off. Later. I stepped to the windows, cracked them 1/2 inch. Rain and river fog slipped into the office like ghosts. The killings weren't to protect the voyage, I said. They were to cover the quiet. Wolfe reached for his beer. To protect the stillness. Then Thibaut Marchand never left the country, I added. Nor Claudia. Nor the ledger, Wolfe said softly. Bridgewater, I said. Or whoever's steering this thing, they needed time. Wolfe closed his eyes. Time to move money. Time to change names. Time to dismantle lives. Indeed, Saul leaned forward. There's one more thing. Wolfe opened his eyes. Yes? The dock's boathouse has insulation thicker than normal, lead-lined, and one corner has been recently repoured, cement still faintly grey. I tapped it. Wolfe turned toward him. It rang hollow. Wolfe said nothing. Saul added, I'll bring tools tomorrow. Wolfe waved a hand. No. Have Mr. Leach accompany you. The boathouse may contain more than ballast. I asked, what are we looking for? Possibly the ledger, possibly Claudia's truth, possibly neither, but not nothing. The grandfather clock murmured behind us. Wolfe said, someone needed the world to think the Charlemagne sailed. I nodded, and made sure no one looked upstate. He lifted his beer. Concealment does not require distance, only belief. Saul stood. I'll call by 10. Wolfe inclined his head. You have been thorough, Mr. Pantser. Saul turned to me. Archie. Got it. He left without another word. I moved to the desk and watched Wolfe as he stared into the space above the orchid schedule. He didn't speak. His hand rested on the rim of the beer glass. I asked, You think Claudia knew? He didn't look at me. She hoped. And Bridgewater? Wolfe met my eyes then. He engineered it. Outside, the rain softened to mist. I waited. Finally, Wolfe said, The Charlemagne did not move, but everyone else did. That is the tragedy. I gave him a nod. Then I shut the blinds. The rain had stopped, but the windows still glistened. I'd drawn the drapes to half, letting in the last light of the day. Warm, faint, like the ember in Wolfe's ashtray. He sat behind his desk, arms folded, brow unmoved. The yellow chair behind him matched the mood, sharp, patient, expectant. Fritz had laid out a tray with beer, but Wolfe hadn't touched it. That meant something. At 8 sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Inspector Kramer. His hat was tilted forward, his coat still damp from the mist outside. This better be worth it, Wolfe, he said as he stepped in. You've said that before, I told him. He didn't smile. I led him in. He took the red chair across from Wolfe and slumped down, as if to broadcast that he wasn't here for theatre. You'll forgive the late hour, Wolfe said, but I wish to speak while recollections remain fresh. Kramer grunted. Make it quick. Wolfe didn't. Instead, he reached for the edge of his blotter and turned it precisely 45 degrees. That was his signal. I shut the door and returned to the desk. We begin, Wolfe said, with Gustave Brevel. Kramer folded his arms. Brevel, Wolfe continued, was no saint, but he had limits. 3 weeks ago he discovered irregularities. Margin skims, shadow investments, buried in the ledger of the Franco-American Exchange. He wrote the damn thing, Kramer muttered. Indeed, but not all of it, Wolfe said. One section, the red ink section, was compiled by Marchand, not Brevel. That is crucial. He paused. Brevel, upon discovering the entries, confronted Marchand. Their disagreement was not about profit, but ethics. Kramer snorted. You expect me to believe financiers argue ethics? Wolfe lifted a brow. You're here to listen. Suspend disbelief. Kramer sighed. Marchand confessed. He had accepted certain deposits through an off-book account, arranged through Claudia Bridgewater. The purpose was clean, to finance Brevel's transition out of European markets. I said, but the source wasn't clean. Precisely, Wolfe replied. It tied back to French state contracts, and if uncovered, would implicate not only Bridgewater, but Laurette St. Valier's father. Kramer blinked. That name again? Wolfe nodded. Brevel intended to come clean. He hid the ledger with Marchand, secured a letter for federal submission, and arranged a meeting with the Treasury liaison. He was cleaning house, I said. Yes, but someone overheard, or was told. Wolfe leaned forward. Simone St. Valier. Kramer's jaw tightened. She feared not only for her father's reputation, Wolfe continued, but for her own security. She had leveraged part of the funds through Bridgewater's firm. If Brevel exposed the ledger, it would ruin her. And you think she killed him? Wolfe shook his head. No, she warned Bridgewater. Kramer narrowed his eyes. And he did the rest. Wolfe said nothing. I spoke. Marchand was the first casualty. He still had the ledger. Claudia took it after he died, trying to barter with Bridgewater. Kramer's fingers drummed the chair arm. Blackmail. No, Wolfe said. Desperation. She tried to run, Wolfe nodded. But the yacht never left Manhattan. That fiction was staged to delay pursuit. Kramer leaned in. Then who killed Dewey? Ah, Wolfe said. Mr. Dewey. He opened a drawer and removed a sheet. Saul's report, stamped and marked. Dewey helped Bridgewater stage the yacht escape. In return, he asked for silence, concern, and compensation. But greed, as ever, overstepped caution. I added, he threatened Bridgewater. Wolfe laid the page down. Dewey was found in a rented room in the Bronx. The cause was blunt trauma delivered with precision. No signs of robbery. Kramer rubbed his face. You're saying Bridgewater cleaned the table? No, Wolfe said. He upended it. The room fell silent. Kramer stood. I'll need proof. You'll have it, Wolfe said. The boathouse on the Hastings estate contains remnants. Painted tools, a burner rig, and a residue of red ink. The ledgers were burned there, half at least. And the rest? Still missing, Wolfe said. But Miss St. Valier feared someone else had it. That fear motivated her. Kramer looked at me. We have witnesses? Saul Panzer and Emery Leach, I said. Both can confirm. Kramer stepped to the window. You better be right, Wolfe. Wolfe didn't respond. Kramer turned back. If this falls apart, I'll bury you in paperwork. Wolfe lifted his beer, untouched until now. I do not bluff, he said. Kramer left without shaking hands. I stayed. Wolfe sipped his beer and set it down gently. Archie, he said. Yes, sir. The ledger was not ink and numbers. No? It was intent. He closed his eyes. And intent, Mr. Goodwin, always leaves a mark. The brownstone had the stillness of a courtroom after verdict. No movement, no murmurs. Just the faint trace of roasted garlic from Fritz's midday ritual, and the comforting hush of old paper and heavier thoughts. Kramer arrived with the rustle of impatience disguised as a trench coat. His hat stayed on, as always, a gesture less about manners and more about holding back the rain clouds he dragged in with him. Got him, he said, stepping into the office. Wolfe didn't look up from his desk. Which him, Inspector? Kramer grunted. Bridgewater, booked. Fraud, obstruction, accessory before and after. Wolfe closed the folder he hadn't been reading. You are prompt. He walked right into it, Kramer said, easing into a red chair. The Prosperine's registration was enough to tip it, but the bookbinder's locker, that sealed it. I leaned forward. So, it was still there? Kramer gave me a nod I could have worn as a medal. Neatly sealed, wrapped like the Declaration. Locker tag registered under a third party. Local firm dissolved in 43. But the ledger's real. The entries match Wolfe's notes. Wolfe shifted his hand over the armrest, slow and deliberate. How did you come by the location? Simone. That brought the office to pause. She told us everything, Kramer continued. Bridgewater pressured her to act as courier, but she didn't know what she was carrying. The day after the murder, she found out. That's when she broke, asked to speak privately. She's still at the precinct, I asked. Kramer nodded. But she won't be charged, DA agreed. Her cooperation helped us locate the ledger and the locker. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, the closest he'd get to public applause. She has my regard. Kramer looked toward the orchids. She said something odd. Said she owed you her life. She does, Wolfe replied, if only by a margin. A silence settled in that wasn't entirely comfortable. Kramer tugged at his collar. Well, that's the bulk of it. One ledger, one arrest, one witness. We'll file the rest under special investigation. I saw Wolfe twitch just once at the word special, but he let it slide. Kramer rose. I'll send you a clean copy for your records. That would be kind. He hesitated at the door, turned. Wolfe? Yes? You ever think about retiring? No. Do you? Kramer's mouth twitched, half smirk, half farewell. Then he was gone, his coat catching the wind as Fritz opened the door without a sound. I followed him out to the stoop just to watch the sidewalk reclaim him. When I returned, the envelope sat square on Wolfe's desk. Simone's. The flap unsealed, the paper creamy and untouched except for a small silver clasp pinning one corner down. Inside, I didn't have to count it. The fold said everything. Clean bills, banded, easily 2,000, maybe more. She means it, I said. Yes, Wolfe murmured, which is why I won't accept it. He nudged the envelope toward me with one finger. Return it. By post or in person? Wolfe didn't answer, so I slipped the envelope into my inner pocket and made a note in my head. Uptown, not today. We ate early, which meant Wolfe had something to say. After the roast duck and Fritz's quiet exit, we sat under the lamplight, silence turning corners in the room. Wolfe finally spoke. I dislike false endings. I arched a brow. We missed something. No, but it offends me that the motive was stillness. You expected movement. I expected ambition, recklessness, or not quiet fraud. He stood, crossed to the globe, spun it once with his finger. They killed not to run, he said, but to remain, an inversion. That's Bridgewater for you. Indeed. We didn't talk much after that. Wolfe took to his chair, I took to the couch, and the orchids stood between us like silent jurors. It was just past 10 when I wandered into the kitchen. Fritz stood with his hands behind his back, gazing at the orchid shelf like he was visiting old friends. The light was low, amber, touched with something that didn't belong to the day. Midnight gardening? I asked. He smiled but didn't turn. I was thinking of the Mariposa alba. The one on the end? He nodded. It's been slow to open, he said. Some blooms need warmth longer than others. I stepped closer, leaned on the counter. The air smelled faintly of lemons and moss. Ever name one after a woman who lied to you? I asked. Fritz chuckled, soft as falling linen. No, I turned. Wolfe was standing at the threshold, barefoot, arms folded, watching. He answered for both of them. Orchids don't lie, he said. We waited. Women do, he added, but both deserve warmth to bloom. And with that, he turned, disappeared into the shadowed hall. The orchids held their breath, and so did we. I turned back and nearly bumped into her. Mr. Goodwin? She asked. She had chestnut hair pinned back with steel clips and wore a collarless green jacket that looked like it had been pressed with 2 bricks. Her tone was calm, precise. Her posture didn't waver. I stepped back. Miss Kessler? Yes. I was told you were the last secretary on file. Her head tilted. I suppose that's true. Then may I have a word? She nodded and stepped around me. Downstairs, there's a room still open. We descended a flight and entered a smaller unit marked Vacancy Available, management office next door. There was a folding chair and a narrow windowsill that let in enough light to avoid a bulb. We sat. I'm not a police officer, I said, but the man I work for is very good at untangling lies. She smiled, but faintly. That sounds useful. Can you tell me when Atlantic Holdings dissolved? She didn't hesitate. 2 days before Mr. Bravel's death. He ordered it himself. He told me to terminate the lease, box the documents and erase the internal schedules. Did he say why? No. But you guessed? Yes. What was your guess? That he was preparing to flee. Her hands were still folded, but her fingers pressed hard. I'd seen it happen before. He started to avoid correspondence, used only initials, had couriers run the internal files, nothing through post. Did he name you in any of those records? No, never. I was never more than an index point. He called me a column header once. Did he mention France? Only twice. Once in April. He said Cannes would be warm that year. The second time was 3 days before he left. He asked whether international air travel could be booked with cash. I took out my notebook. Did he mention Simone Duval? Yes, he trusted her. Too much, maybe. He said she understood the pages, which meant something to him. She didn't know everything, but she saw the connections. And the ledger? That was his masterpiece. He told me it wasn't a ledger at all, not in the formal sense, more of a narrative. Her eyes shifted toward the window. Do you know what it contained? No, she said, but I saw him feeding pages into the fireplace, all night, sheets with faint markings, some handwritten, some typed. Why destroy it? Because he panicked. Her voice dropped. He said the winds were shifting, that the same people who once protected him might soon come looking. Who were those people? I never asked. I waited. She finally reached into her purse. I shouldn't still have this, she said, but I didn't burn it. She passed over a slip, 3 inches wide, curled at the edge. The corner had been blackened, crisped by flame, but a small patch of text remained. I read, May 11th, Cannes, MK. The ink was red. That's your initials, I said. Yes. I thought you weren't listed. I wasn't, not in the ledger, but I think he meant it as a reminder, that if something went wrong, I might be called. You think he planned to have you silenced? No. She stared straight ahead. I think he planned to run, but wanted someone left behind who knew where the door had once been. I folded the scrap and placed it in a notepad sleeve. Why give it to me now? She exhaled. Because if they killed Marchand and Dewey, then the page means I'm not far behind. You believe someone's watching you? I know they are. I've seen the same man twice in the last 3 days. Tweed coat, narrow shoes, doesn't smoke, doesn't cough, always reading a paper that never turns pages. You tell the police? No. Why not? She looked at me, eyes calm, voice level. Because Bravel didn't trust the police, and maybe he was right. I stood. I'll pass the note to Mr. Wolfe. We'll decide the next step. Thank you. At the door, I turned back. Do you still believe he was preparing to flee? Yes. Not to fight? No. She tilted her head. Charles Bravel wasn't brave. He was clever. There's a difference. I left her there, the burned edge of the ledger resting between us like a fuse that hadn't yet been lit. Back on the street, the sun was beginning to fall behind the buildings. The air tasted like copper. I didn't look back, but I counted footsteps behind me, just in case. The rain came light that morning, a patient, silvery kind of wet that softened the glass panes and muted the horns on 35th. I'd just come in from a courier run to the bank, where a wire transfer Wolfe refused to acknowledge had arrived with a cable from Marseille. Wolfe sat under the glow of the desk lamp, unmoving, his yellow chair barely creaking as I stepped in and dropped the envelope onto the corner of the desk. He didn't look up. I didn't ask if he'd eaten. Fritz had brought him eggs 2 hours prior, and the tray came back without a crumb. I gave him 3 seconds, then 4. He said nothing. Shall I polish your globe while we wait for divine revelation? His eyes lifted, slow and grudging. There, he said. He pointed not to the envelope, but to the edge of the desk blotter. Slide that sheet toward you. It wasn't a sheet, not really. It was the singed fragment Marion Kessler had handed me in that half-packed downtown office. A blackened corner, still smelling faintly of soot and lavender. The paper had curled like old birch bark. The ink on the surface was faint, but Wolfe had traced the visible names in pencil, carefully, like an archivist. Each name spaced cleanly apart. 12 names, 8 crossed out, 4 left intact. I leaned closer. Wolfe spoke again, his voice more to the orchids than to me. One doesn't flee federal prosecution over a common bribery ledger. I grunted. You think it's something else? I know it is. He turned the envelope I'd delivered. From within came a folded sheet, stamped and watermarked. I caught the header, U.S. Patent Office. A single code printed in clean mechanical font with 2 owner names. One matched the ledger. Patent number 4444-291, Wolfe said. Filed in 35, reactivated in 41. The category is maritime navigation, though the claim is curiously vague. I stared at the page, frowning. Why would Brevell keep this in the same list as the payouts? Wolfe shifted, picked up the faintly scorched sheet, and tapped the margin with his index finger. Not payouts, holdings. My brow furrowed. Shell companies? He inclined his head. Properties, proxies, possibly patents. Not currency as such, but leverage. Intellectual capital disguised beneath financial terms. A brilliant mask, if one assumes the audience includes both auditors and enemies. The room felt still. Wolfe's hands moved with a deliberate grace now, assembling papers side by side, matching names with filings, addresses, European subsidiaries, corporate shells, each linked to either Brevell, his associates, or vanished yacht stops. You're saying the yacht wasn't just moving money, he exhaled. It was transporting property. But not gold, Archie, not art, ideas, designs, claims too volatile to leave in post-war France, too lucrative to abandon. A quiet passed. I stared at the scrap of paper again, the charred edge with the word can. So, he wasn't fleeing prosecution, I said. He was trying to legitimize it. Wolfe gave a faint smile. He may have been trying to go straight. I paced a few feet toward the windows, felt the weight of it forming in my chest. But someone didn't like that. No, Wolfe said. They didn't. We worked without speaking for 10 more minutes. I handed him a card I'd recovered from Bravell's safe deposit box. A company name, Gallard Maritime Holdings, with a Zurich contact. Wolfe examined it with narrowed eyes. It is not merely a name, he murmured. It is a cipher. Each piece refracts another. He laid it next to a French document I'd seen before. I leaned down. The signatures didn't match. Forgery? I asked. Revision, he gestured. They replaced a signature on the filing after Brevell's death. Why? Wolfe looked at me then, full gaze. Because they wanted the patent. Outside, the rain had thickened. Fritz passed through with a tray for tea and said nothing. I took the liberty of pouring mine while Wolfe continued. Brevell was laundering innovation, he said, not currency. These names, they're not clients, they're conduits. For ideas, for designs, maybe for weapons. I stiffened. Then why kill him? He was helping. No, Wolfe said calmly. He was leaving. The room went still again. You think he was cutting ties? Wolfe nodded once. He planned to sell the yacht. He had a buyer. He had the papers drawn, but someone didn't want him to cash out. Precisely. I set down my cup. We need to talk to that buyer. You will, Wolfe said. Tomorrow morning. Saul is confirming the identity now. He slid a final sheet toward me. Another patent. This one never filed. Just blueprints, mechanical outlines. Rudimentary but clear. A signal device. Shortwave, adjustable frequency, submersible housing. French naval prototype, I said. Wolfe nodded. Leaked in 43, but the final version never appeared. It disappeared with the yacht. He nodded again. I sat back. This isn't a murder for money, is it? No. His voice was grave now. This is a murder for silence. I watched him lean back in the yellow chair. The light pooled around him, warm and dim. His fingers steepled. Then he said, very softly, and for power. The telegram was plain, typed in blue ink on a grey sheet from the agency downtown. I found it on Wolfe's desk when I returned, sandwiched under a folded copy of the Gazette. Wolfe had not touched his beer. It sat warm beside the orchid catalogue, unopened. The message was short. Spotted off Saint-Pierre, flag false. Name, Cap d'Argent. Confirmed Charlemagne. Signed Saul. Wolfe, when I entered, did not raise his eyes. His fingers were steepled, precise. He has the proof, he said. I nodded. He tracked it from Lisbon. No, Wolfe's voice was low. From Halifax. It crossed under the false flag days after Brevel's death. I folded the sheet once, slipped it into my jacket. That's a long way off course. Not if you're hiding. He rose then, not all the way, just that slight forward tilt of his shoulders that meant urgency. It was the closest he came to velocity. You will go to Bridgewater's office, he said. I stiffened. Now? He nodded. Bridgewater was the last man to sign charter documents for the yacht. He claims innocence. That claim deserves testing. I buttoned my coat. Shall I knock or break in? Wolfe did not smile. Do not be theatrical. He handed me a brass key clipped to a card with a 3rd Avenue address. Bridgewater's office suite. Small print firm, mostly cover. Legitimate, but not too. Go, Wolfe said. I left before he could change his mind. It was raining by the time I got there. 3rd Avenue was slick with puddles and cab-light glare. The stairwell to the office was unlit, the kind that smelled of old mop water and vanished tenants. The outer door was ajar. I didn't draw my gun, but I took out my pocket handkerchief and used it to open the handle. Bridgewater's office was empty. Not quiet. Empty. The filing cabinets were open, drawers yanked. The wastebasket had been overturned. One of the blinds flapped in the draught from a cracked window. Someone had cleaned him out, or he'd cleaned himself. The back desk, nearest the radiator, was half open. I pulled the chair aside, crouched, and checked the lowest drawer. Empty. Next drawer up, ledgers missing, notebooks gone. Even the ashtray was gone. But in the top drawer, tucked behind a fountain pen case, I found a small leather key fob. It was silver-rimmed, no key, just a stamped brass disc with letters etched in enamel. SD Can. No company name, no other markings. The leather was old. I pocketed it, closed the drawer, and left nothing else behind. There was no reason to loiter. I was back in the cab before the hour turned. Wolfe was in his chair when I returned. He was sipping beer, finally. Fritz had left the tray without comment. The orchid stood quietly behind him as if listening. I held out the key fob. This was it. Everything else was gone. Wolfe took it carefully, inspecting the edges. No initials? Only that. He held it near the desk lamp, turning it in his fingers. SD, he murmured. I offered Société de Douane? Syndicate Dockers? More likely, he said, Société de Démarche. Or simply Saint-Dominique. French Riviera? He nodded once. Cannes. I paced to the fireplace. So Bridgewater ran? Yes. He knew we were closing in? No, he knew someone else was. Wolfe set the key fob down with care. He is not the type to flee without instruction. I turned. You think he was warned? I think, Wolfe said slowly, he was silenced. The fire cracked. The orchids watched. Wolfe did not move. I have Saul confirming the captain's name, he said. It should match a list Brevel kept in a separate document, one we will not find. I leaned on the desk. You said we know who killed Brevel. He nodded. But we have no yacht, no body, just this. He tapped the key fob. A clue, I said. No, he replied, a confession. They left this behind deliberately, as a message. I frowned. Why? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Because we are close enough to see the pattern. He gestured for my notes. I handed over the sheet from Bridgewater's safe. Wolfe examined it again, cross-referencing the dates. You will return to the harbour, he said. Speak with the customs chief. Ask for a manifest dated 2 days after Brevel's disappearance. Look for any vessel that failed inspection. I nodded. False flag? Or no flag? I turned to go. Wolfe stopped me. Archie. I waited. He did not look at me. We now know who killed Brevel, he said it plainly. But, he added, we must prove it without the yacht. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. I left the room quietly, the fob still gleaming under the lamplight. Wolfe's beer sat untouched again. This time, I didn't remind him. Archie returned Simone's coat to the red chair as I shut the door behind her. She stood still, facing Wolfe, fingers tight around the clasp of her purse. Her gloves were folded inside it. I remember that because she looked down at them, rather than meet his eyes. Wolfe raised his head. The amber light from his desk lamp brushed his cheek like a stage cue. You lied, he said. It wasn't a question. Her shoulders jerked as though the chair beneath her had shifted. You lied about the ledger, Wolfe said. You said it was missing. Simone opened her mouth, then shut it again. Her throat worked in silence. Wolfe placed his fingertips together. Let us save ourselves time, Miss St. Vallier. I will tell you what happened, and you will confirm or deny. But I must warn you, I do not suffer evasion well. She sat back, very slowly, then gave a single nod. Wolfe inclined his head. You had the ledger. You had it the whole time. You removed it from Bravel's office before the police arrived. Simone's voice, when it came, was a whisper. Yes. You knew it was dangerous, Wolfe said, because you read it. Another pause. Yes. I was quiet. My pencil was in my hand, but I hadn't moved it yet. Wolfe's voice darkened, not in volume, but in texture. What did you find? Simone looked up now. Her gaze had none of the earlier tremor. It had settled, not calm, but resolved. My father, she said. There were records, investment names, times, disbursement schedules. Bravel didn't write notes, he wrote numbers. They were too specific to guess. One set matched accounts I knew my father had managed. But the balances were wrong. They were all wrong. Wolfe nodded once. You suspected misappropriation? I knew it, she said. I had long feared it, but this was proof. He had siphoned funds from the Franco-American exchange portfolio, not from clients, but from currency differentials, off the books, silent margins, enough to stain everything. I blinked. And Bravel found out? Simone's jaw tightened. I think so. I don't know how much he knew, but yes, the money Bravel invested, it was from that pool. My father died 2 years ago, but his ledger lived. Wolfe was silent for a long beat. You burned it, he said. Her hands twisted around the purse. Half. Why not the rest? There was a page torn, she said. It was missing from the middle. I hoped that meant someone else had it. That if I destroyed what I had, the rest would vanish too. Wolfe exhaled softly. You gambled. Yes. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, the torn page? Still in the safe, I said. Bring it. I did. Simone's eyes followed the folder as I handed it to Wolfe. He opened it, laid it flat. This page, he said, tapping a line. This schedule matches the red ledger you destroyed. Yes, she said. It was one of the few entries not in code. Wolfe looked at her. And you think someone believes you have the rest? I know they do, she said. Wolfe leaned back. Then we must assume, he said, that they will try again. Silence. Then Wolfe added, Miss St. Vallier, hiding the rest of that book was not only unwise, but it was dangerous. You may not have much time. She stood. Her hands trembled again, but not with fear. Thank you, she said. Wolfe didn't nod. Archie will see you out. I did. No words. Just the click of her heels on the hall tile, then the door closing behind her. When I came back, Wolfe had the ledger page spread again. She burned half, I said, and the other half's likely gone. No, Wolfe murmured. It is not. I raised an eyebrow. He pointed to a faded figure near the bottom. This entry, 17,000 francs transferred through Nouvelle Carte. A shell, one of Bravel's. So? It's dated a month after her father's funeral, he said, meaning Bravel knew and used it. I frowned. You think he was blackmailing her? No, Wolfe said. He was protecting himself. He held proof that implicated her family. She destroyed her copy to avoid scandal, but Bravel's kept him safe until he died. I sat. And now someone thinks she still has it. He gave a nod. Which makes her next. The silence between us was dense. I watched as Wolfe folded the ledger page once, then again. Archie, he said, we must act. He looked up. Before someone else does. The rain had lifted by morning, but Manhattan's gutters still wore it like a memory. I crossed 11th just past 8, fed a dime into the corner stand's coffee urn, and took it black. Wolfe hadn't stirred when I left. He rarely did before his orchids. Thibaut Marchand had vanished from the papers, but not from Wolfe's suspicions. The butler hadn't just served drinks and decorum. His final days told a different story. What Wolfe needed now was motion. Something Marchand had done that didn't fit the tuxedo mold. Something that smelled more like purpose than protocol. The only thread left was the parcel. A sealed oilskin package, no larger than a shoebox, last seen in Marchand's hands 2 days before Brevel was found. It wasn't a bank run, it wasn't a florist, but it was something. I started at Thibault's building on West End. The porter there remembered him well, said he kept odd hours lately, like he had a train to catch but never went anywhere. Not exactly damning, but enough to try the next step. Manhattan has 100 bookbinders. Only 3 dealt in antique materials. Only 1, according to the porter, had sent a hand-addressed receipt to Marchand's apartment 3 weeks ago. Carmichael and Sons. A bell over the door gave a little chime when I pushed in. The shop was warmer than expected, smelled of glue, sun-dried leather, and something sweetly metallic. The front room had more shelves than floor. Most were stacked shoulder-high with loose-leaf volumes wrapped in cloth.